Be a nun in the truest sense. You don't want to spoil your vocation by mingling with the foul-smelling grit of worldly life, so don't glance back, longing for your home and family. Stirring up a hornet's nest. Little Kaew spent the rainy months working around the house and playing with her cousins. She was a happy, cheerful girl, but she missed her mother's calm and comforting presence. She worked hard to please her father, Bunma, but he often appeared distracted by some inner turmoil. He frequently left home in the morning and did not return until late at night. On lunar observance days, Kaew followed the womenfolk to Wat Nong Nong and joined her mother for daily chores, chatting incessantly about life at home. What she said worried Chee. Her husband's regular disappearances were unusual, and from what Kaew described, he seemed to be intoxicated when he returned. Chee decided, for her daughter's sake, that she should visit home occasionally to help with the housework and to keep an eye on the situation. Entering the house, her husband's absence was the first thing she noticed. Chee spent whole days cleaning, laundering, and cooking for her daughter, but Bunma never appeared. During the last month of her retreat, Chee went home once a week, but she never once caught sight of him. Rumors soon reached her that he was secretly having an affair with a woman from another village, a young widow with 2 children. She was told that he had started drinking and carousing in her absence. Chee was repelled by her husband's behavior. Now weary of her marriage and wishing to make the noble path her life, the thought of returning home was unbearable to her. While Chee was morally obliged to keep her word, her husband's failure to adhere to the fundamental rules of moral conduct jeopardized the future of their marriage. As the retreat approached its final days, Chee agonized over her next course of action. She felt no desire to return to married life, but she was deeply concerned about the well-being of her daughter. She wanted to remain close to Kaew, to guide and comfort her, but at 10 years of age, Kaew was still too young to live at the monastery with her mother. Besides, having renounced all worldly possessions, she had no means to support a child, but only the meager daily rations sufficient to sustain one person. Slowly, following several weeks of deliberation, the idea took shape in Chee mind that she could combine both the household and the monastic worlds into her daily life. By spending her daylight hours at home being a mother and a wife, she could fulfill her worldly obligations. By passing her nights at the monastery, absorbed in meditation, she could pursue her spiritual goals. As unorthodox and unrealistic as the scheme seemed, she was willing, even desperate, to try it. So, as agreed, Chee returned home on the final day of the rains retreat. However, she had not relinquished her white robes, nor had she given up her vows. She remained an ordained Chee, but wore a black skirt and blouse over her white robes to disguise her true intentions. She spent the morning and afternoon with Kaew, completing the day's housework and cooking the evening meal. She planned to serve her family dinner and then quickly return to the monastery before dusk. When Kaew and Bunma sat down to eat, she served the food but refrained from eating, as she continued to observe the nun's training rule to forego meals after midday. Chee abstinence provoked her husband's anger. He demanded the reason for her behavior and commanded her to sit and eat. When she refused, he leapt from his seat and tried to grab her by the arm. Chee jumped away, racing down the steps and away from the house. Bunma started to give chase, but was quickly restrained by Chee older brother, Pin. He advised Bunma to let her go. Furious, Bunma bellowed that their marriage was finished. He yelled after her that if she wanted any part of their possessions, she could sue him in the provincial high court. As Chee ran through the village in the descending twilight, she felt drained by the pain and suffering of her worldly life, and at that moment decided to never disrobe. Chee arrived back at the monastery to find that everyone was worried about her. When she recounted what took place, the senior-most nun, Chee Dang, scolded her. "Why bother going back to your husband? You're just stirring up a hornet's nest. Take a lesson and stop sticking your hand into the fire. Even if you don't get burned, your reputation will be." Chee debated cutting off all contact with her husband, but her brothers urged her to settle her affairs with him first. Heeding their advice, she returned to the house several days later to negotiate a formal settlement to their marriage. Her husband was in no mood to compromise. He insisted that everything she had acquired since their marriage rightfully belonged to him. All that remained to decide was what to do with the belongings she had inherited from her parents. Having already renounced the world and its material possessions, Mechi Kaew found it natural, even gratifying, to give everything she owned to Bunma and ask for nothing, except this, that she be allowed to keep the small knife she had always used to cut betel nut. Her husband quickly retorted that she had acquired the knife during their marriage, and it was therefore his. With that final dismissal, Mechi Kaew completely turned her back to domestic life and relinquished all worldly possessions without exception. Having finalized the agreement, Mechi Kaew spoke privately with her daughter. Carefully and in detail, she told little Kaew about the events reshaping their lives and asked for her patience and understanding. Learning of her mother's intention to leave home for good, little Kaew pleaded with a childish innocence for the chance to accompany her mother and live with her at the monastery. With a heart heavy with sympathy, Mechi Kaew described the austere conditions of a nun's life. She explained that since she had now given everything to her father, she had no means to adequately support her daughter. Besides, the monastery wasn't a place to bring up a child. Gently, but insistently, Mechi Kaew urged the child to remain with her father for the time being. She explained that Kaew's father had the resources to look after her needs, and reassured Kaew that his wealth and property would be her rightful inheritance. When Kaew reached maturity, she could, if she still wished, live with her mother. Mechi Kaew would welcome her with an open heart and be her spiritual guide and companion for life. Reluctantly, but obediently, Kaew finally accepted her mother's urging to remain with her father. Mechi Kaew walked back to the monastery in a quiet and pensive mood, replaying the pros and cons of her decision to permanently separate from her family and friends. In the end, her thoughts always came to rest with Prince Siddhartha, who left his wife and son and princely inheritance behind to follow the spiritual path, unencumbered by worldly concerns. Although he abandoned universally honored parental obligations, he did so for the sake of the supremely noble goal of unconditional awakening to the truth of Dhamma and the total destruction of the cycle of birth and death. Becoming a fully enlightened being, the Lord Buddha's achievement transcended all mundane sacrifices and all worldly conventions. Having freed himself from suffering, he had helped countless living beings do the same. With the ultimate goal of the holy life clearly and unalterably fixed in her mind, Mechi Kaew was inspired to follow steadfastly in the Buddha's footsteps.